All right. Welcome back. This is going to be our second lesson in our first unit about chemistry of life, and this is going to be elements of life, the building blocks of life. So, what substances make up living things, living organisms, and why are they made up of those specific elements? So you'll hear a lot in this unit the term macromolecules. And a macromolecule is a larger molecule that is made up from smaller organic substances that are joined together. Macromolecules are the main building blocks of living organisms. In this unit, you are going to hear us talk about the four major classes of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Actually, we are going to save nucleic acids for a different unit. We're going to talk about that when we get into genetics because nucleic acids are like DNA and RNA. And instead of talking about them now, then not really doing much with them until later, right around Thanksgiving time, we're going to save and talk about their structures and functions right when we're going to do genetics, and then it'll be more meaningful. But when we talk about macromolecules or biological macromolecules, we are in general talking about these four things: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And it's what most of the rest of this chemistry of life unit is going to be about. So here's a periodic table that has all of the different elements, all of the different types of atoms. Now, in general, these ones that have just been highlighted here: hydrogen, sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur. They make up, well, and especially carbon, they make up the wide, I need to change that. That's just really annoying. But they make up the large majority, 95% of living organisms. Hydrogen, sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So really, when we're talking in biology about different elements, these are mostly what we're going to be talking about. So life requires about 25 different chemical elements. 25 different chemical elements are essential for life. Four elements make up about 96% of living matter: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Okay, carbon's the backbone of life. Nitrogen is in protein and nucleic acids. Oxygen and hydrogen are found in plentiful amounts in all of our macromolecules. And then four elements make up most of the remaining 4%, and that's phosphorus, calcium, sulfur, and potassium. So out of the 25, right, eight of them make up about 99%. Eight of the 25 make up 99% of living things. So when we were talking about review of chemistry, like, oh, I don't need to remember all of this different stuff about all of these different elements. Really, these 8 to 10 are going to be really what we're going to focus on. Make up 99% of living things. So the chemistry of life is what we call organic chemistry. And organic chemistry is the study of carbon-containing compounds. So carbon is the backbone of life, and all of the molecules in our bodies are organic, meaning they contain carbon. Now, carbon is so important for life, and life is based around carbon because carbon atoms are so very versatile. They have unique bonding properties where they can bond to up to four different things covalently because they have four valence electrons. They can form single, double, and even triple bonds, right? You might have heard of some science fiction or scientists hypothesizing that maybe somewhere in the universe there's silicon-based life because silicon is in the same group as carbon. It has very similar properties. But you know, anymore, that's not a very common idea because there's a lot of other things about silicon that are different from carbon that make it a little bit more difficult to serve the same role that carbon does. So, all life is built on carbon. For example, cells are built on carbon. Um, cells are made up of about 72% water and about 25% carbon compounds. So there's carbon in a good quarter of all cells. Carbon is essential to carbohydrates and lipids and proteins and nucleic acids. So carbon is found in all macromolecules. And then the remaining about 3% of cells are salts, which I don't mean like literally sodium chloride, but salts being key intracellular electrolytes like sodium, chlorine, potassium, things like that. So here is an example of assembling complex models, kind of like Tinker Toys, right? All of them contain carbon, and if we change the number of carbons or the number of other elements attached to it or the bond order, single, double, triple between carbons, we get very different substances that have very different properties. Even though all of these contain just carbon and hydrogen, they all are very, very different. Right? Now, a hydrocarbon, like these pictures are hydrocarbons, are combinations of carbon and hydrogen. That's it. So this is methane, CH4, carbon in the middle, four hydrogens. It's the simplest hydrocarbon. And all hydrocarbons are nonpolar. You probably can verify that based on what we've done with polarity and electronegativity by remembering there is not a very big electronegativity difference between carbon and hydrogen. So all four of these bonds are nonpolar covalent bonds. You can't separate methane, for example, into a positive and a negative section, a more positive or a more negative part. Hydrocarbons then are hydrophobic. They're not soluble in water. And they're pretty stable. That means they have very little attractions or interactions with other molecules. So, for example, a gas at room temperature. Hydrocarbons can be different sizes, like two carbons, three carbons, four, five. They can have different numbers of bonds, like double bonds, and they can even form rings, like cyclohexane and benzene. They can form little rings where the carbons all bound together in a circle like this. Hydrocarbons can also form isomers, which are molecules that have the same molecular formula, so they have the same number of the same type of atoms, but different structures or shapes. So, for example, below, each of these have six carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 hydrogens. All of these have six carbons and 14 hydrogens. They are all then the same molecule, right? That have six carbons, 14 hydrogens, but they're different isomers. They're different shapes. And even though they're the same molecules, since they're different isomers, they can have different chemical properties and they can have different biological functions. So just seeing something's chemical formula, C6H14, for example, does not mean that they're the same thing. Structural differences create important functional significance. So things that are different shapes, like these different isomers, will have different functions because it's based on their structures, right? So for example, an amino acid, there's an amino acid we'll learn about called alanine, and there are two different isomers, an L-alanine and a D-alanine, and only the L version is used in proteins. The D isn't, right? So in medicine, uh, in for different therapeutics. For example, L-DOPA is a medication that's effective for treating Parkinson's or yeah, treating not curing, but treating Parkinson's. The D version is not. Same chemical formula, different isomer, right? So just because they have the same formula, because they have different shapes, one can be very useful to the body to treat Parkinson's, one is biologically inactive. So the specific isomer is important. right? And sometimes, like it says here, that difference can be tragic, can be tragic. So, as a case study, there has been this drug, it's specifically like in the 80s and early 90s called thalidomide. Um, it was prescribed to pregnant women in the 50s and the 60s to treat morning sickness. They were pregnant and would get, nauseous and throw up as a side effect of pregnancy, and this was prescribed to help treat that. But there were two different isomers of this thalidomide, and the wrong isomer caused severe birth defects in babies that had whose mothers who had taken this in pregnancy. So it's not just that, okay, one isomer is going to cause a desired result and the other one just won't do anything. Having the wrong isomer or form or version of a molecule can have severe, drastic, and long-lasting effects. Now, thankfully, that has been sorted out and it's not used anymore. But that's how, just something as simple as the wrong shape can cause severe consequences, right? The next, I want to talk about something that's called functional groups. So a functional group is a part or parts of an organic molecule that are specifically involved in chemical reactions. So these functional groups, or let's say repeating motifs, give organic molecules very distinct properties. So these are the names of different functional groups, like the hydroxyl, carbonyl, carboxyl group. And these are sites of really where a lot of chemical reactions take place in a molecule. And so the different functional groups and their locations within a molecule affect that molecule's reactivity. For example, they make hydrocarbons hydrophilic, and they might increase something solubility in water, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you kind of what I mean on the next slide, where there's a picture of different functional groups. So here on the left are different functional groups. They have their name here, a ball and stick model, and then a formula. So you can see what that functional group looks like, right? On the right, it shows you what that functional group, an example of that functional group in a molecule. So here's ethanol and it has a hydroxyl group. And here is cysteine, an amino acid, and it has a sulfhydryl group. And here is glycerol phosphate that has a phosphate group, right? So one molecule might have a number of different functional groups. One might not have any at all. But these functional groups usually are where chemical reactions will occur. They give these atoms different properties. I would suggest, I'm not going to explicitly test you on it, but I would highly suggest you knowing these. There's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. I would highly suggest you being able to recognize them because as we go through the year, if you are able to recognize them, it will be a great to your advantage greatly that you were able to do so. So, and what do I mean by recognizing them? Look, if you were to look at a structure like one of these and be like, oh, there's a hydroxyl group and I can find a sulfhydryl group and knowing where those things are because as we study more and more throughout the year, they will gain significance to you so you will be able to predict kind of what the function of this substance is going to be based on the functional groups that it has. So is a large diversity of organic molecules that we can create just by substituting different atoms or groups around a carbon. So, for example, here's ethane, C2H6, and here's ethanol, C2H6O. So we've added an oxygen and we've converted ethane to ethanol, which have two very different properties. One's polar ethanol, one's nonpolar, ethane, one's a gas, ethane, one's a liquid, ethanol, all by introducing this one oxygen, having this hydroxyl group. Okay, so we can create a wide diversity of different substances with different properties just based on changing around a few atoms or functional groups. That's what I wanted to make sure that we got through here today, and so we'll continue next time.